When the officer tried to shoo away the dog following him, he found a note that broke his heart. Before we dive into this story, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It's always awesome to see how far our stories are reaching. The rain fell with a stubborn sadness over the empty streets of Grayson Falls, a small town of long shadows and buried stories. It was almost 2 in the morning when Officer James Carter, a man with a sharp jaw and a cold stare, finished his nightly patrol. He walked in silence, his uniform soaked and his heart even heavier, dragging his steps like someone who had seen too much of the world to still believe in it. As he crossed the old Maple Street, he felt something. At first, he thought it was his imagination, maybe the echo of his loneliness, but when he turned, he saw it. A German shepherd covered in mud, ribs poking out, with a desperately human look in its eyes. The dog trailed a few feet behind him, quiet with its tail low and breathing hard. James frowned, turned around and stopped in front of the animal. "I don't have food, and I don't have time for you," he muttered, tired. But the dog didn't back off. It sat down, lowered its ears and let out a soft whimper, as if it knew its mission was bigger than finding shelter. James, with instincts sharpened by years on the beat, crouched down. He noticed something tied to the dog's neck, a rough scrap of cloth with a wet, crumpled piece of paper hanging from it. With shaky hands, he untied the knot and unfolded the note, barely readable under the rain. "Please help my brother. He's sick, and I can't take care of him anymore. We're in the gray building, apartment 2C, E." James felt a sharp pang in his chest. His heart, asleep for years, woke up with a jolt. He looked at the dog again. This time, he didn't see a stray. He saw a messenger, a soul that had crossed the town for something far bigger than itself. "Are you taking me to them?" he asked, his voice breaking. The dog stood up right away and started walking in the opposite direction without looking back. James didn't hesitate. He followed the dog with quick steps, adrenaline cutting through his breath. The town seemed frozen in time. Everything was quiet except for the dog's wet paws on the pavement. In that moment, without knowing why, James knew this night would change everything. He would never be the same man who had walked down that rainy street. The dog ran through the rain like it knew every crack in the pavement, every shadow in the neighborhood. James followed close behind, soaked, his heart pounding like an old fire had been lit inside his chest. This wasn't just a note. It was a call for help. A few blocks from the abandoned downtown of Grayson Falls, the dog stopped in front of a row of gray, silent buildings, where the concrete seemed to crumble under the weight of neglect. The windows were covered with cardboard, the paint peeling like the skin of a battered memory. James looked up. 2C, that was the place. He pulled out his flashlight and lit up the entrance. The metal stairs creaked with every step, and the smell of dampness mixed with something sour, like hopelessness left to rot, hit him hard. Bravo, the German shepherd, waited at the apartment door, paws steady and eyes locked on it. "This is it," James whispered, though he already knew. He didn't need to knock. The silence inside was so unsettling it was enough to tell him something was wrong. With a quick push, he tested the door. It wasn't locked. He opened it slowly. The inside was a heartbreaking scene. Dirty dishes were piled in the small kitchen, blankets scattered on the floor, and in a corner, a makeshift crib made of torn towels. Inside it, a baby, no more than a year old, pale as moonlight, cried weakly, his lips cracked from fever. But what broke James completely was what he saw by the couch. A boy, about 8 years old, thin as a shadow, with messy hair and dirty clothes. He sat cross-legged, clutching an empty baby bottle. His eyes were like a burned-out ocean. "Are you E?" James asked softly, crouching down. The boy looked up, and something in his eyes made James hold his breath. It wasn't just fear. It was the resignation of someone who'd been waiting too long for help that never came. "He's got a fever. I can't go out much and we ran out of milk," the boy said, his voice breaking like a whisper. James moved to the baby and touched him. He was burning up. He grabbed his radio and called for an ambulance, urgent. Bravo stepped closer to the boy, sniffed him gently, then lay down beside him, like he was standing guard. The boy placed a hand on the dog's back and, for the first time, his lips trembled with something close to relief. "I thought no one was coming," he murmured, resting his head against the dog's warm body. James swallowed hard. The scene hit him like a storm inside. He wasn't just an officer doing his job anymore. He was a man who'd just found 2 lives hanging by a thread, and a dog who'd done the impossible to save them. Deep down, he knew he wouldn't leave that night the same. The ambulance siren cut through the stillness like a distant scream, and flashes of blue light slipped through the broken windows like ghosts in the dark. James held the baby against his chest, covering him with his jacket, while Bravo stayed glued to Ethan, who clung to the dog's fur like it was his only anchor in the world. The paramedics, a woman with a stern face and a young guy with a kind look, stepped into the apartment without a word. They didn't need to speak. The heavy air of neglect, the sour smell of days without food, and the pale skin of the younger child said it all. High fever, risk of seizures. We're taking him now, the paramedic said, wrapping the baby in a thermal blanket. James nodded, still quiet. He couldn't talk. Every word felt stuck in his throat like broken glass. He glanced at Ethan, who barely blinked, watching them take his little brother away. Can I go too?" Ethan asked, his voice so soft it was almost a whisper. James crouched down, picked up the boy's tattered backpack from the floor, and slung it over his shoulder. "Of course you're coming with me. I'm not leaving you alone, Ethan," he said with a gentle firmness, almost fatherly. Bravo stood up and with calm steps positioned himself beside the boy. The paramedics hesitated for a second when they saw the huge German shepherd climbing into the ambulance, but one look from James made it clear there was no debate. He's coming too. If it wasn't for him, that baby would be dead. During the ride, Ethan didn't let go of Bravo's ear for a second. James, sitting across from them, watched. It was like seeing a shattered picture slowly start to piece itself back together, thanks to an invisible bond between a boy and a dog. The hospital was cold, white and bright. A nurse took the baby and disappeared behind double doors. James signed papers, showed his badge, and stayed in the waiting room with Ethan on his lap and Bravo lying at his feet, watchful like a silent guardian. Hours passed. Ethan dozed off now and then, startled by nightmares, and each time he woke, Bravo licked his hand to calm him. Finally, a doctor stepped into the hallway, tall with grey hair and thick glasses, his voice steady and deep. "The baby's stable but dehydrated and showing clear signs of malnutrition. Are you the guardian?" James looked up. His blue eyes shone with a pain he didn't try to hide. "As of a few hours ago." "Yeah." The doctor studied him for a moment, then nodded and walked away. James lowered his head. Bravo rested his muzzle on James's boot, and in that moment, without a word, James felt he wasn't alone, for the first time in a long time. The early morning gave way to a grey, misty dawn, as James crossed the threshold of his home for the first time, not alone, but with two small survivors, and a German shepherd who was no longer just a stray, but a living symbol of courage. Ethan stepped inside with hesitant steps, clutching his backpack like he expected someone to kick him out any second. His eyes scanned every corner, the brown couch, the open kitchen with the faint smell of old coffee, the framed photos of a life that seemed so different from his own. Bravo walked beside him, alert, like he was escorting a guest of honor in sacred territory. James offered a glass of warm milk and a slice of buttered bread, setting them on the table without pushing. Ethan sat quietly, not touching anything, staring at the checkered blue tablecloth. "You don't have to eat if you don't want to," James said, crouching to his level. "I just want you to know you're safe here. No one's going to hurt you." Ethan looked at him for the first time with something more than fear. There was still distrust, sure, but also a silent question, like his soul was wondering if it could dare to believe this stranger. Bravo lay down at his feet, muzzle on his paws, eyes half closed as if saying, "Trust him. I already do." That night, James set up a mattress in the guest room where soft sunlight crept through the window. He left a pair of folded pajamas and a warm blanket at the foot of the bed. Ethan stood in the doorway, frozen. "You can sleep here. Bravo will stay with you if you want," James offered from the hallway. Ethan didn't answer. He walked to the bed and slowly sat on the edge. Bravo hopped up gently, looked at him, and settled beside him, breathing deeply. Minutes later, James from the doorway saw something that shook him. Ethan, without a word, had curled up against the dog's warm body and, for the first time since James found him, he was sleeping. No nightmares, no jolts, just sleep. And on his face, a faint, barely there smile seemed to hint that maybe for the first time in a long while, he felt safe. James closed the door quietly, leaned against the hallway wall, and shut his eyes. He let the exhaustion catch up to him, But it wasn't just physical. It was emotional. It was the weight of the choice he'd just made, even if he hadn't said it out loud. He wasn't letting them go. Bravo, from the other side of the door, opened one eye briefly, as if he knew it too. Life at James's house started to find a rhythm, like the silence was slowly getting used to the sound of a second glass of milk being poured, small footsteps in the hallway, and Bravo's soft bark when it was time for a walk. But the calm only lived inside those walls. The first day of school came, and with it, an invisible storm loomed over Ethan. In a freshly washed uniform and a borrowed backpack, the boy walked beside James, head down, while Bravo kept pace with them, a loyal shadow. The dog couldn't go into the school, but James spoke to the principal, a tall woman with graying hair pulled back tightly and a stern gaze named Linda Thompson. "He's been through some rough stuff. I just need you to keep an eye on him, treat him with a little patience," James said, his voice steady. "We treat everyone the same here, Mr. Carter," Linda replied, her tone professionally cold. "But we'll do what we can." Ethan was led to his classroom. James and Bravo watched him disappear down the long hallway, and the dog whimpered softly, reluctant to stay behind. James patted his head. "We'll come back for him, like we promised." Hours later, when they returned, Ethan was sitting alone at the school's entrance, staring into space with a fresh bruise on his cheek. His shirt was dirty, his hands clenched into fists. Bravo ran to him first, nudging him gently with his muzzle. Ethan broke. He threw himself onto the dog and hugged him tightly, sobbing quietly. "Who did this to you?" James asked, crouching down. "It doesn't matter. They just laughed, said I smell weird, called me trash kid," Ethan muttered through gritted teeth. James's heart tightened into a knot. He knew those words. He'd heard them years ago, aimed at himself. He'd grown up in a Wisconsin orphanage, surrounded by taunts and fists in the dark. He never talked about it, until now. He didn't say anything. He just wrapped his arms around Ethan, and Bravo lay beside them, forming a wall of warmth, protection, and care. That night at home, James made hot chocolate. Ethan didn't speak during dinner. He just sipped quietly while Bravo, stretched out near the stove, watched him. "When I was a kid, they called me that too," James said, not looking at him. "And they hit me. I learned to stand up for myself, but not with fists." Ethan looked up, surprised. It was the first time the man had talked about himself. "Over time, I figured out it's not about being strong with your hands. It's about knowing who you are and not letting anyone make you feel like you're worth less." Ethan swallowed hard, and for the first time he leaned toward James, saying nothing, just resting his head on his arm. Bravo inched closer across the floor until he was between them, his steady breathing like a metronome of peace. Trust didn't come with words. It came in shared silence, and in a house that used to be empty, that was more than enough. Days passed since the school incident, and though the bruise on Ethan's cheek faded, the wounds in his heart stayed fresh. James watched him from a distance, noticing the boy no longer looked down when he walked, but he didn't smile either. It was like he'd learned to exist without living. One afternoon, while sorting papers at the dining table, James heard a long, different bark. Not a warning, but an invitation. He looked out the window and saw Bravo with an old soccer ball in his mouth, running circles in the backyard. Behind him, Ethan chased, out of breath, laughing. It was a messy, unstoppable laugh. Ethan ran barefoot, his pants sagging, trying to steal the ball from the German Shepherd, who played smart, dodging with quick turns and jumps. James walked down the steps slowly, like he was afraid to interrupt something sacred. He didn't speak. He just sat on the porch, crossed his arms and watched. Bravo, spotting him, stopped and dropped the ball right at James's feet. Ethan stopped too, panting, his blonde hair stuck to his forehead with sweat. He looked at James, hesitant. James picked up the ball, held it for a second and tossed it high over the yard. "Let's see if you can catch it now, champ," he called, a smile lighting up his weathered face. Ethan ran after it without thinking. Bravo was faster, leaping like lightning. They collided softly as they reached the ball together, and Ethan fell back onto the grass, laughing non-stop. The moment, simple as it seemed, had the power to tear down years of emotional walls. It was childhood creeping back, on tiptoes, like an old friend who hadn't been invited, but was needed. Hours later, as the sun dipped behind two tall oak trees, Ethan helped James put away the toys. He stopped suddenly, holding the ball, and mumbled something that took James's breath away. "Can I call you uncle?" James looked at him steadily. He didn't answer with words, he just ruffled Ethan's hair gently while Bravo sat beside them, chest puffed out with pride. That night, there were no sad stories or tough questions. Just a warm dinner, clean clothes, and a new blue toothbrush placed next to James's in the bathroom cup. Small gestures, but for someone who'd lost everything, a sincere gesture can mean the whole world. And Bravo knew it. The weather had shifted. After days of dull skies, a bright morning finally dawned in Grayson Falls. James was making breakfast when he heard small footsteps enter the kitchen. Ethan, still in pajamas, sat at the table and petted Bravo, who'd claimed his favorite spot by the chair. It was a morning like so many others since everything changed, until the doorbell shattered the calm. James frowned. No one came to his house unannounced. He approached the door cautiously. Bravo stood up instantly, tense, ears perked, a low growl humming in his throat. Behind the wooden door, a woman's silhouette, upright, firm. When he opened it, the impact was immediate. A woman in her early 40s, quietly elegant, with blonde hair tied in a neat bun, eyes cold as mirrors. She looked like she'd stepped out of a past that refused to stay buried. Her name was Sarah Mitchell, social worker, state official. "Good morning, Officer Carter," she said, eyeing James like she was sizing him up. "We got an anonymous tip about the kids you're looking after." James's stomach tightened like a fist. His mind processed her words with military precision, but his heart raced. "What tip?" "That they're in your care without proper court approval, and that you didn't report to Child Protective Services within the legal time frame." For a moment, the world stopped. Ethan, listening from the hallway, stepped back instinctively. Bravo moved between him and the door, as if he could smell danger beyond her polished appearance. James saw fear flicker back into Ethan's eyes, the same fear that had just started to fade. "Listen to me," James said, keeping his voice steady. "I saved those kids from dying. I've taken care of them. They're not numbers or files. They're people. They're family." Sarah glanced at her clipboard. She didn't respond right away. "That's for a judge to decide. For now, I need to see the home, talk to the older boy, and write a report. This isn't about judging you, Mr. Carter. It's about following the law." James, jaw clenched, nodded with no choice. He let her in. Bravo, not fully standing down, tracked her with his eyes, every muscle ready to act if needed. In the living room, Sarah took in every detail. Drawings on the fridge, toys neatly stacked in a wooden box, Ethan's toothbrush next to James's. It all spoke of a home, but sometimes homes aren't enough against the system. "I'll be back tomorrow with a state psychologist, and I need the baby here too," she said as she left. When the door closed, Ethan ran to James. He hugged him tightly. Bravo curled up beside them, as if he could feel the invisible threat hanging over the bonds they'd worked so hard to build. "I don't want them to split us up," Ethan whispered, choking on tears. James didn't answer. He just held him tighter. Hand inside, he swore he wouldn't let the past tear them away from a future that was finally starting to grow. The night before the official visit hung heavy over the house. The air felt thicker, like even the walls were holding their breath. James didn't sleep. He sat in the living room with Bravo at his feet, staring at an old photo of his late wife. Memories blended with the present like leaves carried by the same wind. Ethan slept, clutching one of James's t-shirts. Noah, now stable, rested in a makeshift crib in his room, and Bravo kept watch. At 9 sharp, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway snapped the tension tight. James stood. Bravo did too. He didn't bark, but his stiff posture said more than words. Sarah Mitchell returned, this time with a man with a soft voice, round glasses, and a small notebook under his arm. His name was Dr. Michael Evans, a child psychologist. He seemed kind, but Ethan's eyes hardened the moment he saw him. He'd learned to fear people who carried folders. "How are you today, Ethan?" the doctor asked, crouching to his level. Ethan didn't answer. Bravo moved closer and sat right between them, lowering his head, as if shielding the boy with his whole body. "That dog's like his shadow," Evans said with a smile. "What's his name?" "Bravo," Ethan replied, not looking away. "And what do you like most about Bravo?" Ethan paused. Then, with a low but steady voice, he said, "That he never leaves me alone." The silence was heavy. Evans jotted something down and kept asking simple questions. What he ate, how he slept, if he played, if he felt sad. Ethan answered little, but each word was proof of something real, something true. Sarah scribbled every detail, precise, cold, like each word was part of a bureaucratic code that decided fates. The turning point came when the doctor asked to see Ethan's personal belongings. James led him to the bathroom, where a small detail stole the specialist's breath. 2 toothbrushes, one light blue for a kid with a rocket on it, and next to it, James's, both resting together in the same cup, like they were part of an old, settled routine. Evans looked at James. "Does this boy call you anything yet?" James swallowed hard. He glanced at the living room, where Ethan was quietly stroking Bravo's ears. "Yesterday, he called me uncle for the first time." Evans gave a small smile. He closed his notebook. "Sometimes families aren't made by blood, they're made by choice and instinct. This boy's already chosen. Now it's up to the system to catch up." Sarah said nothing. For the first time, she seemed uneasy, not out of disagreement, but something deeper, the undeniable proof that the bond was real. It couldn't be erased with reports or signatures. Before they left, Ethan walked up to Bravo, whispered something in his ear, like the dog could understand, and then turned to the doctor. "Are they going to split us up?" Evans crouched down and put a hand on his shoulder. "That's not up to me alone, but I'll do everything I can to make sure they don't." When the door closed behind them, James stood rooted to the spot. Ethan looked at him, anxious. James offered his hand. "No matter what happens, we'll fight together. Got it?" Ethan nodded. Bravo sat beside them, proud as an eternal guardian. And finally, Ethan spoke with a steady voice, fearless. "I'm not scared anymore because I have a home." 3 months had passed since that last visit. 3 months of official letters, meetings with social workers, medical exams, psychological evaluations, and page after page of paperwork. 3 months where every day dawned with uncertainty floating in the air. But now, at last, there was a decision. It was a golden morning, with leaves falling in the yard and the warm smell of pancakes drifting from the kitchen. James was setting the table when he heard Ethan's quick footsteps from the hallway, Bravo trailing behind, wagging his tail like he knew something big was coming. "It's here, the letter!" Ethan shouted, holding a white envelope, his heart pounding in his small chest. James took a deep breath. He picked up the envelope calmly. His hands shook, but his face stayed steady, like a man who'd walked through hell and come back. He opened it, he read it, and he smiled. "It's official," he said softly, eyes filling with tears. "As of today, you're legally part of this family." Ethan froze for a second. Then he ran into James's arms, and James lifted him like he was the greatest treasure in the world. Bravo jumped around them, barking loudly, like he was cheering with his heart. Weeks earlier in the courthouse, the judge, a serious man named Robert Hayes, had heard every statement. He'd seen with his own eyes the unbreakable bond between the man, the boy, and the dog, and he made the obvious call. Tell me in the comments, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate this story so far? Your opinion means a lot to me. Custody of Ethan and the baby, officially named Noah, would go to James Carter. Now the house had new sounds. Laughter at the end of the hallway, toys left in corners, small clothes hanging in the sun, handprints on the bathroom mirror. Bravo got secret treats in the afternoons and slept on the rug between the kids' rooms like he always wanted. Ethan came home from school with his backpack unzipped and too many stories to tell. He didn't look down anymore. He didn't whisper. He talked. He sang. He lived. Noah grew strong, full of energy, and had learned to say Bravo before he even said Dad. That's what he called Bravo, who now walked proud beside his little human flock. On the fridge, among drawings and notes, was a photo. It was simple. James, Ethan, Noah in his arms, and Bravo right in the center, tongue out, eyes shining. A family. Odd. Improvised. Real. And deep down they all knew, even Bravo, that what brought them together wasn't chance. It was fate. And when everything seemed lost, it was a German shepherd who showed them the way home. Thank you so much for sticking with this story until the end. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a ton and motivates us to keep bringing new stories every week. And since you're here, take a moment to check out another one of our stories that's popping up on your screen. Big hug and see you next time. Stay well.